If you're going through a divorce, a question that you might have is who gets to stay in the house while the divorce is pending? I'm Yasmin Abdelhak Barker, and I'm going to give you a couple of points about that very question, so stay tuned. When there is a house involved, oftentimes there's a few different ways we can answer that question. Typically in a divorce proceeding, a provisional hearing might be appropriate, or a request for provisional orders. And that's where you're requesting the court to make orders that will last or have power and impact while the case is pending. Those provisional orders might be close to what final orders will be, or they could be vastly different. They're really just there to help give some guidance while the case is pending, which can sometimes take a couple months, sometimes can take more than a year. One of the things that we do deal with in those provisional orders is who's going to stay in the house, or who's going to assume responsibilities for the house, for the mortgage, the utilities, maintenance of the house, all of that. And it really depends on what are the objectives for the house long term. If the parties think they may want to sell the house, that could be a process that gets started even while the divorce is pending. Of course, there needs to either be an agreement between the parties to sell the house or a court order to do so. Do not put your house for sale right when you file for divorce or right when your spouse files for divorce, unless there is a formal agreement. Written agreement is always best to do so, or there's a court order that says that you are permitted to sell the house. So that sometimes can be one way that the question is answered. Another way is, what are the reasons for one party remaining in the home and the other party not remaining in the home? And what also is the evidence that supports whether that request can be granted? What I really mean by that is, if one party wants to stay in the house, then typically there needs to be some kind of justification why both people can't stay in the home. Divorce can be very expensive, can be very time consuming. To add to that, when one party is kicked out of the home that they might have lived in for 10, 15, 20 years, would be another thing we don't want to just throw at the parties. So if there's an agreement that one person will stay in the home and the other person might live with a friend or family member or rent an apartment, then great, you can proceed that way. If there's a disagreement about who's going to stay in the home, you can request that the court make determinations through a provisional order. That can come through a provisional hearing, a hearing where the judge will hear evidence as to who should stay in the home, who should pay for the home, see the finances of the parties, see what the history has been. If there's a history of one party that hasn't really lived in the home, maybe they travel a lot for work. If there's young children involved, typically we try to maintain the status quo for them as much as possible. So rather than having one party move out and take the kids with them while a divorce is pending, we really try to maintain what the children have always known. So those are all things that can come into play when we're trying to answer who's going to keep the house while the divorce is pending. With regard to who's going to pay for the house, that can sometimes be a slightly different question. It is not true that just because one party has, to use the term that we typically use, exclusive use and possession of the house, meaning that they are the ones who are allowed to be in the home, not the other party. Just because they have that doesn't always necessarily mean that they are going to be 100% financially responsible for the house. Very case-by-case basis. Again, it depends on the parties' respective financial earning abilities, contributions, whether there are young children in the home, and what orders, temporary orders at least, on custody and parenting time and child support might look like. All of that comes into play. So if you have a question as to who's going to live in the house while my divorce is pending, you should give us a call. We can talk about that a little bit further.